3 days. That's all it took. I was the invisible engine that kept our entire system running, and they thought I was replaceable. They called me lacking enthusiasm. Difficult to work with, I smiled, signed the termination papers, and turned silence into a weapon. 72 hours later, my CEO lost everything. $87 million evaporated right before the board's eyes. If they thought this was just a power game, they were right. But the rules were mine. My name is Emily Carter, and at 34, I'd built something most engineers only dream about: a cloud infrastructure platform that powered half of Silicon Valley's enterprise clients. Not that anyone at Novatech Systems would tell you that. To them, I was just employee number 47, the quiet one who sat in the corner office without windows, typing away at code they'd never understand. The morning everything changed started like any other. 9:30 a.m., black coffee, 2 monitors glowing with terminal windows. Then the Slack notification appeared. Performance review, Derek Vaughn's office, 10 a.m. sharp. Derek Vaughn, our new CEO. 4 months into his reign of motivational posters and Friday beer pongs, the man who'd never written a line of code but loved to talk about disrupting the disruption. Harvard MBA. Of course, the kind who confused GitHub with GitLab in board meetings, but nobody corrected him because his father owned 12% of our shares. I walked into his office, his innovation space, as he insisted we call it, and found him sitting behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars. The wall behind him displayed his collection of Leader of Tomorrow awards from conferences where you could buy speaking slots. "Emily," he said, not looking up from his MacBook. "Sit." Like I was a dog. The performance review document was already printed, facing me. I scanned it while he talked about cultural fit and energy alignment. My eyes caught the key phrases: lacks enthusiasm, doesn't inspire others, technical competence adequate. Adequate. I'd architected the entire decision logic engine that our $87 million valuation rested on. Adequate. Your bonus this year reflects these concerns, Derek continued, sliding another paper across the mahogany. $1,800. After I'd saved the company from 3 critical failures that would have cost us millions. After I'd worked weekends for 6 months straight during the platform migration. "I see you're not much of a talker," he said, mistaking my silence for acceptance. "That's part of the problem. Emily, leadership is about presence. You need to be seen, be heard. Look at Riley, our new project manager. She's 26 and already making waves. That's the energy we need." Riley, the one who'd asked me last week what SQL stood for. "Do you have any questions?" Derek asked, already checking his phone. I had one question. Did he know that the entire infrastructure he was betting the company's future on had my digital signature embedded in every critical function? Did he understand that I'd written fail-safes into the code, not out of malice, but out of prudent engineering practice that required my personal authorization keys for any major deployment? Of course he didn't. "No questions," I said, taking the papers. "Thank you for the feedback." He looked surprised, maybe disappointed that I hadn't fought back. "That's good. Professional. Though a bit more enthusiasm wouldn't hurt." He laughed at his own comment. I stood up, papers in hand, and turned to leave. At the door, I paused. "Derek," I said, not turning around. "The Orion migration project you're planning, you might want to review the technical dependencies." "That's why we have a team," he replied dismissively. "No need to overthink things." Walking back to my office, I passed the kitchen where Riley was holding court, explaining her revolutionary approach to agile development. 3 junior developers hung on every word, probably because she looked like she'd stepped out of a Netflix series about startup life. I sat at my desk and opened the infrastructure documentation. 800 pages of decisions, optimizations, and custom logic that I'd crafted over 3 years. At the bottom of every critical section, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a small notation: implementation requires primary architect authorization. I'd added that during a late-night coding session 2 years ago. after the previous CTO had tried to sell our platform to a competitor without the engineering team's knowledge. It was perfectly legal, I'd even had it reviewed by legal, who'd approved it as protecting intellectual property integrity. Derek didn't know. Riley didn't know. The new rockstar team they were assembling didn't know. I opened my personal laptop and began documenting every piece of institutional knowledge that existed only in my head, not to help them, but to prove, when the time came, that I'd tried to warn them. Every email I'd sent about critical dependencies, every Slack message ignored, every risk assessment dismissed as pessimistic thinking. The termination was coming. I could feel it in the way Derek had already written me off. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He thought I was replaceable. The restructuring began the following Monday. Derek called it Operation Phoenix, because apparently everything needed a dramatic name now. I watched from my corner as the company I'd helped build transformed into something unrecognizable. First to go was Marcus, our database architect, 15 years of experience, replaced by 2 cloud-native specialists, fresh from a coding boot camp. They had enthusiasm. Derek said they brought fresh perspectives. They also didn't know the difference between acid compliance and battery acid, but who was counting? Then Sarah from DevOps. Not collaborative enough. According to the new metrics, she'd only kept our servers running with 99.9% uptime for 3 years straight. But she didn't participate in the mandatory innovation breakfast meetings at 7:30 a.m., so clearly she wasn't a team player. The invitation to the next architecture meeting never came. I found out about it when Riley posted selfies from the conference room on the company Slack. #FutureForward. #disrupting infrastructure. In the background of one photo, I could see the whiteboard where they'd redrawn my system design. They'd removed every redundancy, every failsafe. Streamlining, Riley called it in her enthusiastic update post. I messaged Derek directly. The redundancies in the data migration path aren't optional. They prevent cascade failures during high-load transfers. His response came 3 hours later. Thanks for the input, Riley's got this covered. Focus on your assigned maintenance tasks. Maintenance tasks. I'd gone from system architect to janitor. That evening, I stayed late, not unusual. Except this time, I wasn't fixing their mistakes. I was documenting everything. Every warning I'd embedded in the code comments. Every critical dependency they were ignoring. Every time bomb they were accidentally arming in their pursuit of efficiency. But I also did something else. I began implementing what I called the authentication protocol. It wasn't malicious, I want to be clear about that. It was protection. Every core function I'd written now included a verification layer that checked for valid architect credentials before allowing major modifications. The beauty was, it looked like standard security protocol. Hell, it was standard security protocol. Just one that happened to require my personal cryptographic signature for any fundamental changes to the logic engine. The code was clean, commented, and completely legal. I even generated a pull request, following proper channels. Riley approved it without reading. She approved everything that sounded technical enough. Love the security mindset, she commented on the merge. 2 weeks into Operation Phoenix, I was excluded from the daily stand-up. We're trying a leaner format, Derek explained in passing. More dynamic. I watched from my desk as Riley led the meeting, using terms she'd clearly Googled that morning. We need to leverage our synergies in the cloud space, she announced, while the 2 remaining senior engineers exchanged glances that screamed, help us. Carl Newman was one of them, the only other architect from the original team who'd survived the purge, probably because he had director in his title, and Derek hadn't figured out yet that Carl reported to me, not the other way around. Carl stopped by my desk after the meeting. This is insane, he whispered, checking over his shoulder. They're talking about migrating the entire infrastructure in 6 weeks. The original timeline was 6 months, and that was aggressive. I know, I said, not looking up from my screen. They're removing all the checkpoints you built in. Riley says they're friction points. I know. Carl stared at me. You're not going to fight this. I finally looked up. Carl, Do you remember when I asked everyone to review the intellectual property clauses in the architecture documentation 2 years ago? He frowned. Vaguely. Something about attribution rights. Attribution and authorization. Every core system I designed includes a legal requirement for architect approval before deployment. It's in the contracts. It's in the code. It's in the documentation nobody reads anymore. His eyes widened. Emily, that's completely legal and binding. I had it reviewed by legal myself. They even complimented me on protecting the company's intellectual property. Carl looked like he wanted to say more, but Riley was approaching with her iPad and her perpetual smile. Hey, team, she chirped. Emily, great news. We're transitioning your role to focus more on documentation. You're so good at the detailed stuff, and we want to free you up from all these meeting obligations. Translation, you're being sidelined completely. Oh, Riley added, as if just remembering. We'll need you to hand over all your admin access by end of week. Security audit. You know Derek wants to streamline credential management. I smiled. Of course, I'll prepare everything for handover. Riley beamed and bounced away, probably to update her LinkedIn about her leadership wins. Carl looked at me with something between admiration and horror. They have no idea what they're doing. Do they? No, I said, returning to my screen where I was carefully documenting every administrative credential except for the ones hard-coded into the logic engine itself, the ones that weren't stored in any credential manager, the ones that existed only in my head and in the encrypted backup I kept in my personal safe deposit box. They really don't. The final warning came on a Thursday, delivered with all the warmth of a court summons. HR had scheduled a check-in at 2 p.m., their euphemism for, "We're building a case to fire you." Jessica from HR sat across from me, her smile as synthetic as her nails. Derek flanked her, scrolling through his phone like this was beneath him. Between them sat a folder with my name on it, thick with what I assumed were documented incidents. Emily, Jessica began, we've had some concerns raised about your cultural fit. There it was, the corporate kiss of death. You've been described as, she consulted her notes, resistant to change, uncollaborative, and frankly, your energy doesn't align with our new direction. Could you provide specific examples? I asked, my voice neutral. Derek looked up from his phone. Do we really need to itemize every instance the pattern is clear? You're not embracing the Phoenix vision. The Phoenix vision, his plan to burn down everything that worked and hope something better emerged from the ashes. Jessica pushed a document across the table. This is a performance improvement plan. You have 2 weeks to demonstrate meaningful change in your attitude and collaboration style. I read through it. Attend all team social events. Contribute positively to brainstorming sessions. Show visible enthusiasm for company initiatives. It was designed to be unfailable. How do you measure enthusiasm? How do you quantify the correct amount of positivity? And if I don't sign this, I asked. Then we'll have to discuss alternative arrangements, Jessica said, her smile never wavering. We'd prefer a smooth transition, of course. Alternative arrangements, immediate termination with cause, no severance. I picked up the pen, hesitated for exactly 3 seconds enough to make them nervous, then signed my name with a steady hand. Excellent choice, Derek said, already standing. I'm sure you'll turn things around. He was out the door before I'd even capped the pen. Jessica gathered her papers, paused, and in a moment of unexpected humanity, said quietly, For what it's worth, I know what you built here. It's a shame. Then she was gone too, leaving me alone in the conference room with its motivational posters and dying succulents. I returned to my desk and opened my personal laptop. The email I'd been drafting for weeks was ready, a comprehensive technical handover document, 40 pages of system architecture, dependencies, and operational procedures, everything they'd need to run the platform successfully. Except for one small detail. Buried in subsection 7.3.2, in the middle of a paragraph about database migrations, was a single line. Critical system functions require primary architect authorization per IP Agreement 2019 A7732. I CC'd legal on the email, knowing they'd file it without reading. I CC'd Carl, knowing he'd understand. I sent it to Derek and Riley with the subject line, "Complete technical handover documentation. Please review." Riley responded within minutes, "Thanks, filed for reference." She hadn't opened the attachment. I knew because I'd embedded a read receipt tracker. Derek never responded at all. The next 2 weeks played out exactly as scripted. I attended the Innovation Breakfast, where Riley presented her migration plan, my design, with all the safety features stripped out. I sat through the Team Synergy workshop, where we built towers out of spaghetti and marshmallows to foster collaboration. I even participated in the Motivation Monday session, where Derek had us share our personal why. My personal why, I said when my turn came, is ensuring that systems run exactly as designed. Everyone applauded. Nobody listened. On my last day, they organized a farewell party, grocery store cake, warm champagne, and speeches about new opportunities. Derek made a joke about my attention to detail being legendary. Riley hugged me and said she'd love to pick my brain sometime about technical stuff. I packed my desk slowly, methodically, the picture of my cat, the stress ball I'd never used, the coffee mug with a Linux joke nobody else understood. I left behind the binder 80 pages of printed documentation, bound in black leather, sitting prominently on my empty desk. The cover page read, "Critical System Dependencies and Legal Obligations. Please review before Orion deployment." Security walked me out at 5 p.m. sharp. Company policy: immediately revoke access. Escort from premises. The guard, Tony, whom I'd fixed computer issues for over the years, looked apologetic. "Sorry about this, Emily. You deserve better." "It's fine, Tony. Just doing your job." At the door, I turned back to look at the building one last time, through the third-floor windows. I could see the war room where Riley's team was already working on the Orion migration. Sticky notes covered every surface. Excited faces clustered around monitors showing system diagrams they didn't fully understand. I pulled out my phone and did the one thing I'd been holding off on. I activated the automated logging system I'd built into the platform, the one that would meticulously record every error, every failed authentication attempt, every moment when the system tried to execute a critical function without proper authorization. The logs would be beautiful, comprehensive, undeniable. My phone buzzed. A text from Carl. "They're starting the migration tonight. God help us all." I typed back, "Not God, just standard authentication protocol." Then I deleted the conversation, got in my car, and drove home. The countdown had begun. Freedom tasted like morning coffee without Slack notifications. I'd started my own consulting firm, nothing fancy. Just me, my laptop, and clients who actually valued expertise over enthusiasm. Within a week, I had 3 contracts. Turns out, competent engineers who don't need constant validation are in demand. Meanwhile, Derek was painting himself as the visionary who'd cleaned house at Novatech. His LinkedIn posts were works of art. Sometimes leadership means making tough decisions. Proud to announce that Project Orion is ahead of schedule, thanks to our amazing new team, Innovation, Leadership, Phoenix. The comments were predictable. "Congratulations. Inspiring. Can't wait to see the results." Tina Brooks, my former colleague and current inside source, kept me updated through carefully worded personal emails. She was smart enough to use her own device, never company systems. "You should see the war room," she wrote. "It's like a startup stereotype exploded. Beanbags, whiteboards everywhere, and Riley's motivational quotes on every surface. Fail fast, fail forward, is literally painted on the wall." The screenshots she sent were better than any comedy show. Slack channels full of Riley asking questions like, "What's a load balancer?" followed by enthusiastic responses from the new hires who Googled answers in real time. Derek chiming in with, "Love the collaborative learning," when it was clear nobody knew what they were doing. But the best part was the system architecture diagram Riley had posted with the caption, "Simplified and optimized, we've removed unnecessary complexity." She'd eliminated every redundancy, every fail-safe, every circuit breaker I'd carefully placed to prevent cascade failures. It was like looking at a house with all the support beams removed because someone thought they made the floor plan look cluttered. Week 2 brought the first signs of trouble. Tina forwarded a thread where the new team celebrated completing the preliminary migration to the test environment. "Crushed it," Riley had posted, followed by a string of fire emojis. Except the test environment wasn't responding correctly. APIs were timing out. Data synchronization was failing silently. But instead of investigating, they marked it as minor bugs to address in Sprint 2. I knew exactly what was happening. The authentication protocol was kicking in. Every time they tried to execute a core function, the system was checking for valid architect credentials. Without them, it defaulted to safe mode limited functionality. No critical operations. It wasn't breaking. It was protecting itself. The beauty was in the error messages. They weren't dramatic. No red alerts or system crashes, just quiet log entries. Function requires additional authorization. Please consult Technical Documentation Section 7.32. According to Tina, Riley had assigned a junior developer to look into those weird auth messages when you have time. Priority low. By week 3, Derek was getting impatient. The board meeting was in 4 days. He needed Orion running at full capacity to justify the massive restructuring costs. The pressure was showing in his increasingly aggressive Slack messages. "Why is this taking so long?" "We removed all the blockers." "The old system is fighting the migration," Riley explained in a public channel, probably trying to shift blame. "Legacy code issues. Emily's stuff was really convoluted." That's when they made their fatal mistake. Riley announced she'd found a workaround. She'd have her team rewrite the core logic from scratch, cleaner, faster, better. They'd bypass my overly complex authentication system entirely. Carl messaged me privately. "They're really doing it. They're trying to rebuild 3 years of work in 4 days." I was sitting in a coffee shop, meeting with a new client, when I saw Tina's urgent text, "Check LinkedIn now." Derek had posted a video tour of the Novatech office, showcasing the Orion War Room. "This is innovation in action," he announced to the camera. "My team is revolutionizing enterprise cloud infrastructure. We're not just migrating data, we're reimagining what's possible." In the background, I could see exhausted developers hunched over laptops, empty energy drink cans everywhere, and Riley at a whiteboard drawing system diagrams that made no technical sense. One monitor clearly showed error logs scrolling endlessly, but Derek either didn't notice or didn't care. The comments were different this time. A few industry veterans were asking pointed questions. "Interesting approach to remove all redundancies. How are you handling failover? And 3-week migration seems aggressive for that scale. What's your rollback plan?" Derek's response to all of them: "Disruption requires bold thinking. Traditional approaches are what hold companies back." Tina's next message included a photo from inside the office. The black binder I'd left on my desk had been moved to a shelf, spine facing inward, buried under team-building trophies and Riley's collection of business books with titles like "Move Fast and Break Things." Nobody had opened it. Nobody had read the warnings. Nobody had bothered to understand what they were destroying. The board meeting was in 72 hours. Derek had promised them a live demonstration of Orion handling real enterprise traffic. Riley had assured him they'd be ready. I pulled up the authentication logs on my personal monitoring system. Yes, I'd maintained read-only access to the logs. Completely legal since they were outputting to a public cloud storage bucket that Riley had accidentally left open. The error count was climbing exponentially. Every attempt to initialize the production migration was failing the same check, invalid architect credentials. But they kept trying, over and over, like someone repeatedly pulling a door marked push. My new client was talking about their infrastructure needs, but I was only half listening. I was watching a $48 million disaster unfold in real time, and the only people who could stop it were too proud to read a manual. "Sorry," I said, refocusing on my client. "You were saying about your database requirements." After all, I had a business to run. The countdown at Novatech was their problem now. The collapse began at 3:27 a.m. on a Tuesday. 36 hours before the board meeting. I know the exact time because my phone lit up with automated alerts from the public status page that Novatech had forgotten to restrict. Error 5004. Database synchronization failed. Error 4004. API gateway timeout. Error 5004. Database synchronization failed. Error 4004. API gateway timeout. The pattern repeated endlessly, a digital death spiral in real time. By 6 a.m., Tina was messaging frantically. "The entire test environment is down. Riley's been here all night trying to fix it. She's literally crying at her desk." I felt a twinge of sympathy almost. Then I remembered Riley's LinkedIn post about replacing outdated talent with fresh perspectives. The war room, according to Tina's covert photos, looked like a disaster zone. Pizza boxes stacked in corners, engineers passed out on beanbags, and Riley at the center, frantically typing on 3 laptops simultaneously. The motivational posters seemed to mock them now. Fail fast, fail forward, hanging above a team that was simply failing. Derek arrived at 7 a.m., and his rage was audible even in Tina's text descriptions. "He's screaming about sabotage, says someone must have hacked the system. He wants to call the FBI." But it wasn't sabotage, it was architecture. Every function Riley's team had tried to rewrite was hitting the same wall. They couldn't replicate the decision logic without understanding why I'd built it that way. They'd copied the surface-level code but missed the intricate dependencies woven throughout. It was like trying to perform heart surgery after watching a YouTube video you might know where to cut, but you don't understand why. By noon, they'd called in external consultants, 2 firms, both charging emergency rates of $1,500 per hour. One of them, I noticed with satisfaction, was a company that had tried to recruit me last year. The consultant's verdict was swift and brutal. Tina forwarded me their preliminary report. The migration attempted to bypass critical authentication protocols embedded in the core logic. Attempting to proceed without proper authorization has triggered systematic fail-safes. Recommend immediate rollback and consultation with original system architect. Derek's response, witnessed by half the office: "We don't need her, fix it without her." So they tried. God, how they tried. Riley's clean rewrite had introduced 17 critical bugs. The consultants found them in an hour, but fixing them revealed 23 more. The code base had become a hydra cut off one problem, and 2 more appeared. Then someone Tina couldn't figure out who made the brilliant decision to try forcing the migration to production anyway. Maybe it will work better with real data, they reasoned. At 4:45 p.m., Novatech's main platform went down. Not slow, not glitchy, down. 37 enterprise clients lost access simultaneously. The support queue exploded. The status page, the one I was still monitoring, showed a sea of red. Every system, every service, every function dead. But the real catastrophe was the data corruption. In their desperation to force the migration, they'd ignored the warnings about asynchronous writes. Customer data was being written to multiple databases simultaneously without proper locks. The result was a nightmare of partially updated records, orphaned transactions, and corrupted indexes. Carl finally spoke up. According to Tina, he stood up in the war room, walked to the shelf where my black binder had been buried, and slammed it on the table in front of Derek. "Page 73, he said. "Emily documented exactly how to prevent this. We just had to follow the damn manual." Derek grabbed the binder, flipped through it frantically, then threw it across the room. "Then why didn't anyone read this earlier?" The silence that followed was deafening, "Because you told us to ignore her." Everyone thought, but no one said. Emergency meetings were called. The board was notified. Trading of Novatech stock was halted pending an announcement. The number 87 million was being thrown around not as potential value, but as potential losses if they couldn't restore service within 24 hours. At 9 p.m., Derek did what he should have done 3 weeks ago. He authorized Carl to reach out to me. Carl's call came at 9:17 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. His message was professional but desperate. "Emily, we need you. I know how this looks. I know what they did to you, but there are 37 companies and thousands of users affected. Please. I texted back. I'm available as an external consultant. My rate is $3,000 per hour, minimum 72 hours, paid in advance. I'll also need written acknowledgement of my architectural ownership and a legal guarantee of no retaliation. The response came in 11 minutes. Derek agrees to all terms. Legal is drafting the contract now. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The logs told the whole story, every error, every failed attempt, every moment where they'd ignored the system's warnings. It would take me maybe 6 hours to fix if I wanted to move fast, but they'd paid for 72 hours, and I intended to use every single one. At 10:30 p.m., I sent my first official communication as an external consultant. I'll begin work at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Please ensure all staff involved in the failed migration are available for a technical review. Also, ensure the board of directors is present for my preliminary findings at noon. Derek's response was immediate. The board meeting is supposed to be tomorrow at 2 p.m. Can't this wait until after? No, I replied. The board needs to understand the full scope of what happened before they meet with shareholders, unless you'd prefer they learn about it from the news. The typing indicator showed him starting and stopping his response 6 times. Finally, noon it is. I closed my laptop and went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept perfectly. The house of cards hadn't just fallen, it had caught fire on the way down. And tomorrow, I would walk into that building not as the employee they'd discarded, but as the only person who could put out the flames. The irony was delicious. Carl was waiting for me in the lobby at 8 a.m. sharp, holding my consultant badge and looking like he'd aged 5 years in 3 weeks. Behind him stood Jessica from HR, her synthetic smile notably absent. "Emily," Carl said quietly, "before we go up, you should know Derek's been telling everyone you planted some kind of virus." "That's defamation," I said, loud enough for Jessica to hear. "I hope legal is prepared for that conversation as well." Jessica's face went pale. "Of course, that's not the company's official position. We're grateful you're here to help." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor was silent. When the doors opened, I saw the full devastation. Engineers slumped at desks, some still in yesterday's clothes. The war room's glass walls revealed a chaos of diagrams, with Riley at the center, her usually perfect appearance completely disheveled. Derek stood when I entered, his Harvard MBA confidence visibly cracked. "Emily, thank you for coming. We need to fix this immediately." "First," I said, setting my laptop on the table, "let's discuss what actually happened. Carl, did you find the documentation I mentioned?" Carl had done more than find it. He'd spent the night digging through every piece of code, every commit history, every technical decision I'd made, and he'd found something even I hadn't expected him to discover so quickly. "The authentication protocol," he said, pulling up the code on the main screen. "It's not a bug. It's not sabotage. It's a legally binding security measure that Emily implemented 2 years ago with full legal approval." He displayed the email chain legal's approval, the CTO's sign-off, even Derek's predecessor acknowledging it as excellent IP protection. "Every critical function requires architect-level credentials," Carl continued. "When Emily left, her credentials were revoked as per standard security protocol, but the system still requires them to modify core logic. So give her the credentials back," Derek snapped. "It doesn't work that way," I said calmly. "The credentials are cryptographically tied to my original employment contract. When you terminated me, they became permanently invalid. The system recognizes me as an external entity now." Riley finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "So we just need you to remove the authentication requirement." "I can't," I said. "It's not won't, I literally can't. Removing it would require architect credentials, which creates a circular dependency. It's like needing your keys to unlock the box where you keep your keys." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "However," I continued, opening my laptop, "there is a solution. The original documentation outlined a disaster recovery protocol. Page 73 through 78 of the binder you threw across the room yesterday. Derek. Someone had retrieved the binder. It sat on the table, coffee-stained and slightly torn. I opened it to the relevant section, where I detailed the emergency restoration procedure 2 years ago. The system can be restored using the archived codebase from before the authentication protocol was implemented, then carefully upgraded with proper credentials. It's delicate, time-consuming, but doable. How long? Derek asked. 48 to 72 hours if everything goes perfectly. The board meeting is in 4 hours. Then you'll need to tell them the truth, I said. That in your rush to streamline and innovate, you ignored critical documentation, fired the person who understood the system, and attempted to rebuild 3 years of work in 3 weeks. Derek's face turned purple. This is your fault. You booby-trapped the system. I protected the company's intellectual property with legal's full approval, I corrected. Every safeguard I implemented is documented, reviewed, and signed off by the previous leadership. You have the paper trail. Carl pulled up more documents. There's more. Emily's employment contract includes a clause about her architectural work. Section 12.3. Any attempt to modify or deploy her core systems without her explicit approval could be considered IP theft. Jessica from HR looked like she might faint. We need to call legal, now. As she rushed out, I turned to the room full of exhausted developers. Who wants to learn how to actually fix this? For the next 3 hours, I taught them what Riley should have known before attempting the migration. Not just the how, but the why. Why each redundancy existed. Why the authentication mattered. Why rushing innovation without understanding foundation was like building a skyscraper on sand. Riley, to her credit, took notes. Real notes. Not Instagram-worthy bullet journals. At one point, she asked, "Why didn't you explain this before?" I tried, I said, pulling up my email history. 17 messages over 2 weeks warning about these exact issues, all marked as low priority or ignored entirely. At 11:45, legal arrived, 3 lawyers, including the general counsel, all looking deeply concerned. Ms. Carter, the lead counsel began, we've reviewed the situation. The authentication protocol you implemented is indeed legally binding. The company's attempt to bypass it could be construed as... I'm not interested in litigation, I interrupted. I'm here to fix the problem, but the board needs to understand exactly what happened and why. The general counsel nodded slowly. We appreciate your position. Can you have a preliminary report ready for the noon meeting? I pulled up the presentation I'd been preparing all morning. 40 slides of technical details, legal implications, and most importantly, evidence. Every ignored warning, every dismissed concern, every moment where ego trumped expertise. It's ready now, I said. As we walked to the boardroom, Derek tried one last power play. You're still bound by your NDA. You can't disparage the company. Stating facts isn't disparagement, I replied. And considering you've been telling people I planted a virus, I'd be careful about throwing around legal threats. The boardroom doors opened. 7 board members sat around the mahogany table, including the lead investor who championed Derek's hiring. It was noon exactly. Time to show them what their Phoenix project had really burned. The boardroom was a study in controlled panic. 7 faces, each worth tens of millions, all wearing the same expression of barely contained fury. At the head sat Margaret Walsh, the lead investor who'd personally recruited Derek from his last startup, the one that had quietly folded 6 months after his departure. Ms. Carter, Margaret said, her voice arctic, we've been told there's a complete system failure. Derek assures us it's due to malicious code you planted. You have 15 minutes to explain yourself. I connected my laptop to the presentation system. I'll need less than that to show you the truth. Slide 1. The Authentication Protocol Approval Chain, dated 2 years ago. This is the security measure Derek claims is sabotage. As you can see, it was approved by legal, the former CTO, and the board's technology committee. It's designed to protect our intellectual property from unauthorized modifications. Slide 2. The email trail of warnings. Over the past 3 weeks, I sent 17 documented warnings about the risks of bypassing this protocol. Each was dismissed or ignored. Derek interrupted. Those were obviously attempts to maintain control after your termination. I was still employed when I sent the first 15, I said, clicking to the timeline. The last 2 were sent as part of my legally required handover documentation. Slide 3. The actual system architecture versus Riley's simplified version. This is what was built over 3 years, I said, pointing to the original design. And this is what your new team tried to implement in 3 weeks. A board member I recognized him as the former Microsoft executive leaned forward. That second design, it has no redundancies, no fail-safes, it's amateur work. It's innovative disruption, Derek protested, removing unnecessary complexity. It's negligence, the board member cut him off. I continued through the slides, the mounting errors, the ignored documentation, the moment they tried to force the production migration despite hundreds of warnings. Then I showed them the legal slide. According to Section 12.3 of my original employment contract, any attempt to deploy or modify my architectural work without my explicit authorization constitutes intellectual property theft. The company is currently in breach of its own contracts. The General Counsel nodded reluctantly. Ms. Carter's interpretation is correct. We're exposed to significant liability. Margaret Walsh's attention turned to Derek. You told us Emily was a low performer with attitude problems. She was, Derek insisted. Look at her reviews. I clicked to the next slide my actual performance metrics. 3 years of on-time deliveries, 0 critical failures, 99.9% uptime. Interesting definition of low performance, another board member muttered. Carl stood up. May I add something? I've been here since the beginning. Emily built the system that generated our $87 million valuation. She wasn't fired for performance. She was fired for not being enthusiastic enough about Derek's weekly motivation meetings. That's an oversimplification, Derek started. Is it? Margaret pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. I'm looking at your LinkedIn posts. Derek, 3 weeks ago, you wrote about clearing out the deadwood and bringing in fresh energy. You posted a photo of Riley's team with the caption, "This is what innovation looks like." She turned her phone to show the room. In the background of Derek's triumphant photo, you could clearly see error messages on every monitor. Ms. Carter, Margaret said, what will it take to fix this? 72 hours of restoration work, which I've already been contracted to complete. However, there's a larger issue. The attempted migration has corrupted approximately 30% of the production data. Full recovery will require rebuilding those datasets from backups, assuming proper backups exist. They exist, Carl confirmed. Emily insisted on triple redundancy for all backups. It was one of the unnecessary complexities Derek wanted to eliminate next quarter. The room fell silent. Finally, the former Microsoft executive spoke. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Derek Vaughan as CEO. Seconded, said another member. This is ridiculous. Derek stood up. You're going to take her word. We're taking the evidence's word, Margaret said coldly. All in favor. 7 hands raised. Derek's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, desperate calculation. Fine, but my contract guarantees. Your contract guarantees severance, unless terminated for cause. The General Counsel interrupted. Attempting to cover up a massive system failure while misleading the board constitutes cause. What about Riley? I asked. She was following Derek's orders. Margaret looked at Riley, who had been silent throughout the presentation. Ms. Summers, you have 2 choices. Resign immediately with 2 weeks severance, or stay and face potential legal action for your role in this disaster. Riley's response was immediate. I resign. As security arrived to escort Derek out the same protocol I'd experienced 3 weeks ago, he turned to me with pure hatred. You planned this. No, I said. I planned for competent management. You did this entirely on your own. The board meeting continued for another hour. They offered me the CTO position. I declined. They offered me a contractor relationship at 5 times my previous salary. I declined that too. Then what do you want? Margaret asked. I want to finish fixing the system, collect my consulting fee, and leave. But I also want Carl promoted to CTO. He's the only one who bothered to read the documentation. And I want the team that was fired during Operation Phoenix offered their jobs back, at 20% above their previous salaries. The board agreed to everything. As I left the boardroom, I passed Derek in the lobby, frantically typing on his phone, probably updating his LinkedIn, spinning this as a strategic departure or a new opportunity for growth. He looked up as I walked by. This isn't over. I stopped, turned, and smiled. Actually, Derek, it is, in about 6 hours. News of this failure will hit TechCrunch. By market open tomorrow, Novatech's valuation will drop by approximately 40%. The SEC will likely investigate the misleading statements you made to investors. Your career in tech is effectively over. You can't know that. I pulled out my phone and showed him an email from a TechCrunch reporter. Ms. Carter, we'd love to interview you about the authentication protocol that saved Novatech from complete data loss. Our sources say it prevented a catastrophic breach. Can we schedule a call? I haven't responded yet, I said, but I will. After all, protecting intellectual property through proper authentication isn't sabotage, it's just good architecture. The news broke faster than even I had predicted. By 6 p.m. that evening, TechCrunch ran the headline, Novatech CEO ousted after 87.7 NAS. System failure, fired engineers' security protocols, prevent total collapse. I was still in the office, working through the restoration process with Carl and the skeleton crew of engineers who'd survived Operation Phoenix. Every hour, another piece of the system came back online. Every restored function was a small victory against hubris and incompetence. At 9 p.m., Margaret Walsh came to the war room personally, the board chairman of a billion-dollar portfolio, standing among empty pizza boxes and exhausted developers. The restoration, she asked. 40% complete, I reported. We'll have basic functionality by morning, full restoration within 48 hours. She nodded, then did something unexpected. She pulled up a chair and sat down. I owe you an apology. I championed Derek's hiring. I bought into his vision without understanding what we were destroying. You weren't in the daily operations, I said, continuing to type. You trusted your CEO to make informed decisions. That's no excuse. We got seduced by charisma over competence, by buzzwords over actual expertise. She paused. The other board members and I have been discussing something. We want to implement a new policy. Any significant technical decision must be reviewed by the actual engineers who built the system, not just management. It was a start. By midnight, we'd restored 60% functionality. The critical clients were back online. The data corruption was contained, with most records recovered from the triple redundant backups Derek had wanted to eliminate. Carl pulled me aside. You could have let it all burn. After what they did to you, no one would have blamed you. It wasn't about them, I said. 37 companies depend on this platform, thousands of users. They didn't fire me. At 2 a.m., Derek's LinkedIn post appeared. Excited to announce I'm taking time to explore new opportunities and spend time with family. Proud of what we accomplished at Novatech and looking forward to the next adventure. Always forward had entrepreneurship. The comments were brutal. Word had spread through the tech community. Former employees shared their experiences. Investors questioned his previous successes. Within hours, the post was deleted, but the screenshots lived forever. Riley's departure was quieter. She sent me a single email. I'm sorry. I was in over my head and too proud to admit it. Thank you for not letting my mistakes destroy everything. I didn't reply. Some lessons need to be lived with, not absolved. By morning, the system was at 85% capacity. The board released a statement taking full responsibility for the failure, praising the engineering team's recovery efforts, and announcing Carl's promotion to CTO. They also announced a comprehensive review of their hiring and operational practices. The stock market's reaction was swift, but not as catastrophic as it could have been. The successful recovery and transparent communication actually earned investor confidence. Novatech dropped 23% at open, but recovered half of that by close. The authentication protocol that Derek had called sabotage was being hailed as a masterclass in defensive architecture. My 72 hours were up at 8 a.m. on Friday. The system was at 95% restoration. The remaining 5% would take weeks, but it was stable, secure, and properly documented. I submitted my final invoice, $216,000 for 72 hours of work. It was approved within minutes. The engineering team gathered as I packed up my laptop. Some were original team members Carl had called back. Others were from Riley's crew, humbled but eager to learn properly this time. The documentation is all there. I told them, read it, understand it, question it, but most importantly, respect it. Every line of code, every redundancy, every safeguard exists for a reason. Carl walked me to the elevator. You know the CTO position is yours whenever you want it. I know, but I'm done building other people's dreams. Time to build my own. As the elevator doors closed, I saw the war room one last time. The motivational posters were gone. The beanbags had been replaced with proper chairs. The whiteboards showed careful, methodical planning instead of buzzword soup. It looked like a place where real work happened. My phone buzzed with messages. 3 more companies wanting to hire me as a consultant. A speaking invitation for a conference on defensive architecture and IP protection. An offer from a publisher interested in my story. But the message that mattered most came from Tina. The internal memo just went out. Derek's entire innovation initiative has been reversed. They're calling it Return to Engineering Excellence. Also, that binder you left. It's now required reading for every new hire. I sat in my car in the Novatech parking lot, watching employees arrive for the morning shift. They'd never know how close they'd come to complete catastrophe, how their CEO's ego had nearly destroyed everything, how a bitter, unenthusiastic engineer had built safeguards that saved them from themselves. But that was fine. The best engineering is invisible until someone tries to remove it. The final aftermath came 3 days later. The SEC announced an investigation into Derek Vaughn for misleading investors about the successful restructuring while hiding critical system failures. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The man who'd fired me for poor attitude was facing potential federal charges for securities fraud. As for me, I was sitting in my new office, a small but bright space overlooking the bay, interviewing my 3rd engineer for the consulting firm I was building. We were already booked solid for 6 months. Tell me, I asked the candidate, what do you think is more important, innovation or reliability? Both, she answered. Innovation without reliability is just expensive failure. I hired her on the spot. My phone buzzed with one final text from Carl. System fully restored, 0 data loss, your architecture held. I typed back, it was never about me. But we both knew the truth. In the end, it had been about me, about every dismissed engineer, every ignored warning, every expertise devalued in favor of charisma. Derek had lost $87 million in 72 hours. But I'd won something worth more proof that competence, in the end, always beats confidence. The system hadn't failed. The people who'd ignored it had. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and vindication. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to hear in the comments below where you're listening to these workplace justice stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed this tale of engineering excellence triumphing over management incompetence, share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed expertise being dismissed in favor of empty enthusiasm? Let's discuss in the comments.